As you all know, Darla and I were missionaries in the Philippines with our two little boys, and we had the privilege of going down to some of the areas where World War II was a very significant battle sites in the Philippines. And you all might remember General George S. Patton. I'm not going to have you raise your hands if you were alive when he was alive, but he was a significant general during World War II, and it was on June the 5th in 1944 that he began to speak to the men who were to begin the battle going towards the Philippines. He was not in the Philippines at the time. He was on one of the islands outside of the Philippines. But on June the 5th, 1944, he gathered with the Allied forces, and he began to say this speech. He said, and the speech left no room for failure. He said, "I don't want to get any message saying I am holding my position. We are not holding," he said. "We are advancing constantly, and we are not interested in holding on to anything. Our basic plan of operation is to advance and to keep on advancing regardless of whether or not we have to go over, under, through the enemy." Can you just hear that general commanding? And I'm sure that there was great fear in all of the minds and the hearts of those young men preparing to jump into the water and charge the shores. The fate of the entire free world was riding on their shoulders. The Israelites faced a similar overwhelming defeat is not an option military challenge. The time had come to enter the land that God had promised Abraham now 600 years previous. And it was time to start the very next chapter in God's upper story that he was just about to explain to Joshua and the Israelites. Would you mind standing? And I'm going to read Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 11. My friends, what I'm about to read to you is God's word, and if you'll read it and trust it, I promise you, it will change your lives. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place you will set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river to the Euphrates, all of the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all of the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, "Go throughout the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your very own. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Coming to this river border brought back painful memories for Joshua, I have to imagine. He's now the leader of the Israelites. He has taken Moses' place. You see, 40 years before, his leader Moses had sent 12 spies into the promised land, and Joshua was one of them. 12 spies were to sneak into Canaan, check it out, look for any fortresses, what type of people, what type of fruit, are there mountains, are there trees, and they were to write a report and bring it back. The diligent dozen brought back both good news and bad news. The good news was, yes, this is a land filled with milk and honey. The grape clusters are so large, they said, it took 2 men just to carry one cluster of grapes. Can you imagine? No, I can't. Can you imagine the fruitfulness of those valleys and the ability to have anything that they needed in a place like that? There was good news, but there was also some bad news from some of them. In fact, 10 of them. They said, listen, the inhabitants are big, and they're tall, and they're scary-looking warriors. The spies said that they look like grasshoppers themselves compared to these big giants that live there. 10 of the spies were afraid, and their recommendation said, we can't go back, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are, it says in Numbers chapter 13. Basically, the report was this, if they wrote it. We are sorry to announce that we are at this time unable to do what God has clearly revealed. Because having done a careful evaluation, in the wrong direction we have decided that the personal cost of obedience to the will of God is too high. That's what the 10 basically were saying. But there were 2 spies that were full of faith. The 2 spies brought the minority report. And their response, they vehemently disagreed. They recommended an immediate attack. That was totally different than what the other 10 spies said. Unfortunately, the other 10 spies had begun to spread the bad news to all of the Israelites, and the Israelites had already started grumbling against Moses. And Joshua was one of those 2 faithful spies. They said this, the land we pass through is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, we will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them, they said. Well, the stubborn, faithless Israelites got their way and more. Not only did they not cross over to the promised land as Joshua recommended, but they stayed wandering in the wilderness their entire lives for 40 more years. God punished them for their faithlessness, and He required all of the Israelites to wander in the wilderness until all of those over the age of 20 died. except the 2 faithful spies. So they wandered and wandered and wandered in the desert until they had all died off. You see, sometimes the best punishment is to give someone exactly what he or she wants. And that's exactly what God gave to the Israelites. They wandered for 40 years until everyone had died that were living during that first entrance into Canaan. In the book of Numbers, the diary of the wandering years really didn't have to be written. It's one of those books that if they would have just obeyed, the book of Numbers did not have to be included in the Bible. God banished an entire generation of his own people from entering the promised land because of their lack of faith. I wonder what we miss out on when we respond to God's invitation without faith. I wonder what chapters of our lives have been written because we did not step out in faith. I wonder. After 40 years of wandering, Moses leads the now young Israelites, all of them quite young now, to the border of the promised land. He anoints Joshua, that one of the 2 faithful spies, and he now becomes the leader, and Moses dies as he is looking onto the promised land. Moses doesn't get to go in. Now, there were critical challenges ahead. There certainly was a challenge of timing. If you're a general, if you're in charge of your soldiers, you're thinking about a whole lot of things that could go wrong, and timing was not great for them to enter into this land of giants and armies and fortresses. Remember, this is the same Canaan land that the 12 spies had gone into 40 years previously. It was the same land full of milk and honey, but also it was still a land of big, ugly warriors that they had already seen. It was a city of fortified, it was a place of fortified cities all over the place. So they knew that they were against all of that already. But there was also this challenge of circumcision. And I know right now, many of you are going, this is going to be an interesting section. I wonder how Pastor Brent's going to get us out of this. Hang on. God commanded the young Israelite soldiers to be circumcised before they went into battle. Now, I want us to stop and try to understand the importance, the theological importance of circumcision in the Old Testament. It's often an embarrassing or misunderstood part of the Old Testament customs, so let's skip over it so we don't have to talk about it. But it truly is a very meaningful way to understand how God saw his people. Circumcision was the removal of the male foreskin, normally 8 days after birth of a male. Circumcision signified an outward sign of God's covenant with his people. It was an outward sign, an outward testimony of the covenant that God had established with his people. So it was a sign of Abraham's covenant with God. We might remember the story in Genesis chapter 17. Then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Abraham's covenant was the promise 650 years previous, that he would be the father of a very special family with children that would equal the number of the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky. It would be huge, God told Abraham. And circumcision was a constant reminder to the Hebrew people that God would keep his covenant. So throughout the Old Testament, we hear God speaking of this requirement of circumcision. It had theological implications. It had identification implications, and it certainly had historical implications. So it was very significant to the Hebrew men. So back to the challenge of this circumcision and how it posed a problem to this ongoing battle. I don't want to be indelicate, but performing circumcision on an adult male is not great timing, especially when you're about to go into battle. The best time is obviously when a little boy is just a few days old, not when you're 20 or 30 years old. It's not exactly the best way to be physically perfect, ready to go into battle. Remember, they did not have stainless steel scalpels here. They were either knives made from flint. Yes, stone knives are very crude metal knives. And these poor guys were going to be in a world of hurt for several days before this major conflict. Why circumcision now, though? Why was this so important to God and to Joshua? These young men had not been circumcised yet. They had been born in the wilderness. They had been wandering now for all of their lives. And because circumcision was an act of setting the people off as holy people, God required it of these young men before they entered into the promised land. Remember, the Israelites were to be a holy nation. They were to be sanctified or set aside for holy use. Now, everybody take a breath. Ready? Okay, now he's done with that topic. I can just imagine the dinner table conversation today. There's also a challenge, and it was this challenge of the river. Scripture tells us that they approached Jericho on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now, the Jordan River could rise up to a depth of 12 feet in some areas, and it could be as wide as 360 feet wide. Many football fields. So you'll see in the picture above, if you go north of the Dead Sea, that is where they were coming. They were headed west. They were going from east to west, right north of the Dead Sea. That is where they were just about to attack Jericho. The river posed a strategic challenge. Just imagine 600,000 Israeli soldiers trying to safely cross a river that could have been 360 feet wide without notifying the enemy that was just miles away in a fortified city. Can you imagine being the general? Can you imagine being Joshua telling everybody, shh, be quiet, don't splash, be quiet at night? And we don't have time to talk about it, but as soon as those priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, as soon as their sandals touched the water, the Scripture says the river immediately stopped flowing upstream, and they crossed over on dry ground. So there's the challenge of circumcision, there's the challenge of the river, there's also the challenge of a battle plan. Jericho stood in their way, and it was considered one of the oldest cities in the entire world that we can now find. There was evidence that there was some type of settlement there dating back even, they're guessing, 9,000 BC. Jericho was massive for that day. Thousands of people lived behind its walls. It was one of the most protected and fortified cities in all of Canaan. And wouldn't you know it, it was the first city that Joshua was to attack. Jericho sat on a large mound of earth, surrounded by an embankment with a stone retaining wall. That very first one might have been the light area down at the bottom, would have been around 12 to 15 feet at its base. On top of that retaining wall was yet another wall that would have been around 25 feet tall. And on top of that one was another wall that was another 45 feet tall. And the top of that wall, the top of the very top wall was so wide, it said, we find, that it was so wide that two chariots could drive together on top of it. That's how significant those walls were. Standing on the ground, looking up, the Israelites could see the soldiers 75 feet above them. Now, I want everybody to look at the peak of our sanctuary. That peak, we're guessing, is 35 feet. Double it. And that is where the armies of Jericho had their swords and their spears and their arrows aiming down at Joshua and his men. Joshua ordered them to merely walk around the city once a day for 6 days in total silence. Now, I'm not a soldier. My boys are, and I'm sure my boys would have just shaken their head at Joshua. I'm shaking my head at Joshua. I think I could have put together a better plan, but God seems to have another plan. He says, I want you to walk in total silence around Jericho one time a day for 6 days. Then on the seventh day, you're to march 7 times around and just begin to scream at my command. Now, I've got a picture here. Does anybody know Barney Fife? You know, I love Barney. I'm so glad reruns are on. Barney just kind of, he has a way of making plans that you just scratch your head and think, how could he be successful with that? But I want you to know, when I read this, it's almost as if Barney Fife has created the plan to attack. And you know the sheriff is just scratching his head going, what are you talking about? But, okay, just pretend like Joshua is Barney Fife, and this is the battle plan the Barney Fife is explaining to the men. Their battle plan sounded crazy to them. This is what it probably sounded like Barney was talking. Okay, folks, we're going to cross that raging river on the edge of town without any boats or bridges. And once we get to the other side, I want all of you guys to meet me in this big tent, and I want you to bring me the flint knives and Band-Aids because, well, I need to cut your foreskins off. And when we're finished with that, we're going to form a big column, and parade around the huge walled fortress where giant warriors will be waiting to ambush us. No need to bring weapons except for 7 of you. March in silence, bring your trumpets. When I say the word, make some noise. Yep, that's all there is to it, okay? Let's go. Can you hear it? That's what the soldiers were hearing from Joshua. Joshua knew it was coming from God. The soldiers were like, what in the world? When you look at it from our perspective, the lower story perspective, the story that only you and I understand, and it's so myopic and we get to see just a little part, it really is almost funny. So much here was at stake. God's chosen people had waited 650 years to enter this land that was promised to them. And now God was saying, just cross the raging river, perform a delicate surgery on your men, and then march around a well-fortified city inhabited by giant warriors. That's all. Nothing about God's plan made sense. At least from our human perspective, at least from our human vantage point. We've seen in this series already that God's ways are not always our ways. And this is because his upper story is always in the center of his mind as he is looking at history. Someone so aptly wrote, the community in which he can dwell will be unlike any other community because its citizens will obey God rather than follow their own logical judgments and subjective desires. We often have such great ideas about how to successfully go into battle. But God asks us to do it his way, even when his way seems to be a sure recipe for failure. Well, then he begins to command courage and strength. Did you notice God said that 3 different times in that first passage I read? God knew all of these challenges that were in Joshua and the soldiers' minds. So God gives this command to be strong and courageous in Joshua chapter 1. 3 different times he says, be strong and courageous. And also, don't be afraid. And variations of don't be afraid shows up in the Old and New Testament 365 times in the Bible. Isn't that an interesting number? 365 times. The community God is creating would not be characterized by fear, despite the fact that they had faced many fearsome moments, and God gave them a command to obey all of the law. He says in Joshua chapter 1, be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of law. Keep this book of law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. These commands had nothing to do with fighting the battle. They were given to the Israelites so that they would get along with each other. They were given for them to establish the kind of community that God could and would inhabit. God was intent on doing life with the Israelites. So he wanted them to remember what it meant to live as a holy people. Obeying the law created the conditions for God's final reassuring message to Joshua on the eve of the very first battle. He said, if you do this, I will be with you. So can I tell you, here is the key to victory? The key to victory was found not in superior weapons and conventional strategy, but the key to victory was obedience. The key to victory was just obedience. God was essentially saying to Joshua, don't be afraid. Trust me. Do exactly what I ask you to do. Live according to the guidelines I have given you, and you will defeat anyone who stands against you. Just trust me. You don't have to understand. It doesn't have to fit with your understanding of strategy. Just obey. And Joshua's response is exactly what we would have expected from a man of God. He said, whatever you have commanded, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Whatever. He was basically saying, Lord, take out of my hands or put into my hands whatever you know to be best. We'll do it. We don't have to understand. Well, we don't have time to tell the amazing stories and explain the scene. You guys are actually going to read the story this coming week if you're on schedule. But of the 600,000 soldiers crossing, I don't have time to explain the 600,000 crossing the river and dry ground, or the scene of the soldiers marching around this fortified city for 6 days in total silence, or retell the story of the seventh day when they let out a loud shout and begin to blow trumpets. But I can tell you that because they obeyed, the walls came tumbling down. And the city was completely taken by the Israelites. Can I tell you just a few lessons about God's expectation of His people? The community that God envisions for His people cannot tolerate sin. The Israelites were not only to set themselves apart as holy people, but they were not to tolerate sin where they were to live. All of the citizens of Jericho, they represented sin. They were to be removed completely, every single one. God does not expect us to live like the world, talk like the world, or act in sinful ways like the world. The second is this: God wanted to establish His holy name in Canaan so that everyone could know the one true God. Remember, God wanted Israel to be holy so that all of the nations around the world would look into Canaan, look into the Israelite people and say, that's what God looks like. That's how God responds. That's how holy God is. They would all be looking at how the Israelites trusted during the difficult times. They would watch to see if they bowed down to false gods, whether they followed God during the difficult days, because how they acted mirrored God, and that's why God required them to live holy lives. And the third and last is this: God wanted to be intimately involved with His people. Remember, God's intent was to bring His creation back into warm fellowship, the same genuine fellowship that He had with Adam and Eve. That was His original intent and still is His constant intent with us. God wanted to live closely with His people, the Israelites. He wanted to provide for them. He wanted to heal them. He wanted to protect them. He wanted to love them. And it shouldn't be a surprise to us that this intimate relationship, this genuine fellowship, is exactly what He wants for us today. So just as Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, God allows us to fight our battles, and we all have them. We all have our unique circumstances, but we know that He is in charge. His promise to us stands even today. Obey me, and I'll be with you, and I'll give you success, and I will live with you and be in peace with you if you will only obey me. Would you please stand? I've tried to imagine what was going on in the mind of Joshua as he stood on the hillside looking into the promised land. But in between him and the promised land were so many barriers. There was this requirement of circumcision, and then there was this huge river. And then there was this fortified city. And then there was this battle plan that God had given him that didn't make sense. None of it did. But in his mind, he heard the words of God ringing in his ear. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. I've had the joy of walking the journey with many of you as you've gone through some pretty difficult challenges. And sometimes we shake our heads wondering if life could be harder. And many times you're thinking, nope, it can't get any worse than this. But we must hear the words of the Father who also say to us, do not be terrified, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.
When I walk through deep waters, I know that you will be with me. When I'm standing in the fire, I will not be overcome. Through the valley of the shadow, I will not fear. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me. In the midst of deep sorrow, I see your light is breaking through. The dark of night will not overtake me. I am pressing into you. Lord, you fight my every battle, and I will not fear. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me. You amaze me, redeem me. You call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me. You call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me. You call me as your own. You amaze me, redeem me. You call me as your own. You're my strength. You're my defender. You're my refuge in the storm. Through these trials, you've always been faithful. You bring healing to my soul. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. I am not alone. You go before me. You will never leave me.
Did you receive this benediction? Perhaps this morning you were looking into a land full of giants and tall walls. May you lean into the presence of a holy and wise God to lead you through the battle. Remember, be strong, be courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So now, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, go in peace, for he's already gone before you. You're dismissed.